Okay, welcome everyone to this FWR webinar, The River Crane and Urban Smarter Water Catchment. This webinar sets out the main findings of the Urban Smarter Water Catchment project, considers the extent to which the catchment has been transformed, and whether it might be possible to achieve good ecological status in a highly developed urban river. As always with our webinars, there will be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these using the Q&A option that you should find at the bottom of your screen. You can use this at any point during the presentation, and I will then ask these questions on your behalf later on. I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today, Rob Gray. Rob has a background in environmental management and a passion for rivers. He has worked for 20 years in consultancy, mostly with W.S. Atkins, and specialising in catchment management. In 2003, he helped to found Friends of the River Crane Environment, a charity working to enhance the community and environmental value of the small West London River. In 2021, he helped to set up the Crane Valley CIC, which chairs the Crane Valley Partnership and plays a lead role in delivering the Smarter Water Catchment programme. Thank you so much for joining us, Rob. I'll now get the slides up and hand over to you.
Thank you, Ethne, and welcome everybody. This is our first opportunity to actually say something in public about this project. So hopefully you'll get a sense of what the River Crane is like and also what Smarter Water Catchment means. So as Ethne says, my name's Rob Gray. I'm chair of something called the Crane Valley Community Interest Company, and we are the host organization for the Crane Valley Partnership. The Crane Valley is a small river in West London. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. So next slide, please, Ethne. So here we are. Here's the Crane, 125 square kilometers of West London. That's about 10% of Greater London. It's one of 10 tributaries of the Thames, which are catchments which flow into the Thames in London. There's a sketch there on the right-hand side of the screen, which basically shows a small stream turning into a river, flowing from the north to the south. It rises as two streams in Harrow, in the hills of Harrow, and then flows through 5 West London boroughs: Harrow, Hillingdon, Ealing, Hounslow, and Richmond. Being an urban system, it's quite complicated. It's got different names in different places. So it's also known as the Yedden Brook and the Roxbourne Brook. It also includes artificial channels like the Duke of Northumberland's River, Upper and Lower, and the Longford River, all of which were built in the sort of around about the 1500s as artificial transfer channels. It's very urban, as I say. It includes Heathrow Airport, not an inconsiderable fact. It includes several major cross-cutting road and rail transport links, including the M40, the M4, A30, A316. We have about 650,000 inhabitants, so it's mostly urban, as I say. It's a mix from working class, middle class, very affluent areas which are majority non-white British, a whole mix of different sort of areas, which is quite typical if people know London. It also, very interestingly, if you were to look at the river on a satellite image and the catchment, you would see a grey catchment with a green corridor or spine running through it. There's a lot of green space, but it's very linear. There's about 4,000 hectares in total of green space, but it's stretched out linearly all along the catchment. 9 nature reserves, numerous parks and open spaces. Next slide, please, Ethne. So here's a couple of examples, both of which are very urban, as you can see. We've got the upper part of the catchment in the summer and the lower part, the very lowest part of the catchment, which is concrete lined in the winter. It doesn't all look this urban. If people can see the picture behind me, that's a winding part of the crane with lots of ranunculus in the riverbed, and looks very rural and idyllic, actually. So it varies an awful lot in its characteristics, which I'll come on to again later. Ethne, next slide, please. So just a little bit of background about the partnership. We established the partnership in 2005. At that time, I was chair of something called FORCE, Friends of the River Crane Environment, and we worked together with the 5 local authorities, Heathrow, Thames, and the Environment Agency to bring the partnership together. So it predates actually the CABA catchment-based approach. So the partnership worked at a fairly low level, really, for the first 5 or 6 years. And bizarrely, but not unusually, we were energized by a major pollution event in 2011, which wiped out most of the active river system down to, we lost about 10,000 fish, and we ended up a month later with just black fly in the river and a few snails. We got wiped out again in 2013, as a result of which Thames Water invested £400,000 in the river with a pledge that in 5 years' time it was going to be better than it had been before the incident. That allowed us to appoint a development manager. We also ran a number of projects as part of that, one of which was Citizen Crane, which is a citizen science project, which I'll talk about more later. That's still running. And the success of these programs really led Thames to select the crane as the first urban smarter water catchment, which kicked off in 2020, which is the main focus of this talk, really. We also, as part of that, set up a catchment-specific social enterprise as the host organization, which really acts as the interface between the local authorities, Thames Water, the large regulatory and sort of private organizations, and a host of community groups and third sector organizations. So today we've got 8 core funders, and we've got around 60 partner organizations, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So what is a smarter water catchment? This is an initiative which was originally set up by Thames Water in 2015, looking at a rural system, the even load catchment. And at that time, they were looking at farms and payments to farmers for environmentally sensitive farming linked to nutrient enrichment of rural systems. That was reasonably successful, and basically they said, can this work in other systems? So they looked for an example of a chalk stream and chose the Chess catchment in the Chilterns, and an urban system and chose the Crane. As far as we're aware, this is the first in the UK that has taken this approach, this catchment and partnership-based approach to catchment management in this way. We've had £3 million over 5 years with a fairly broad amount of flexibility as to how we invest that funding. It's all, those investment decisions are made by the partners. We're just coming to the end of that 5-year program. It ends at the end of March next year. But the whole program, the whole Smarter Water Catchment program, links to the environment plan. So the intention is, with a fair wind, to keep this going until 2040 and to roll it out across the Thames region. So it's partnership driven. It's catchment based. And community is absolutely integral to what we're doing, right from the conception of projects all the way through delivery and ongoing management and maintenance. We've identified 5 main themes, and I'll talk more about those themes in a moment. We've also set up 2 different funds to deliver projects. So there's a competitive bid process, both for the main project fund and also for a separate communities fund, which is the main project fund is for projects up to £100,000 typically. The communities fund is for projects up to £2,000 with a much simpler application process. And we believe that this has created a step change in our approach to catchment management. Next slide, please, Ethel. So what are our 5 themes? I'll run through them, each of which has a theme lead organization and a network of other organizations attached to that. Excuse me a second. So water quality is the first theme. It's led by ZSL, Zoological Society of London. And ZSL are also leading the second theme, which is the biodiversity and ecological connectivity theme. A third theme is all around community and public awareness, and also the related issue of access. That's led by a local social enterprise called Let's Go Outside and Learn, who've been working with Force and other organizations for about 10 or 15 years now. And also Sustrans. Sustrans are leading on the access theme. Geomorphology is a key theme. You can see from those photographs that the river system has been heavily engineered at various locations. Cartographer are leading on that theme. Cartographer came out of Queen Mary's University, and they have developed the Urban River Survey and the MORPH system, if people are aware of those 2 systems, to evaluate the geomorphological value of a system and to monitor how that can be improved. And then the final theme is flooding and flood resilience, and we've got a local consultancy based in Richmond called Metis, who are doing a lot of work with local authorities, really plugged into their approach to flood management. Next slide, please. This is the first theme, water quality. I mentioned Citizen Crane. That's now been running for 10 years, and that's a network of volunteers, over 60 in the network, who go out every month and do water samples, take water samples, and also do kick sampling for the RMI methodology, if people know that, a method of monitoring invertebrates. That's really helped us to develop a really much more refined understanding of how the ecosystem works. Coming out of that, actually in 2016, we did, again, I think a UK first, the first volunteer-led outfall safari of the Crane Valley, identifying around about 250 surface water outfalls, many of which were polluting at the time. We've subsequently done 2 more outfall safaris to look at those outfalls. The whole program is linked to the Thames Water generally and the Environment Agency, and in particular to their SWAP program, their surface water outfall program. So we've been able to work with their contractors and send their contractors to the sites which are particularly polluted. And over the last 5 years, I think there's been several hundred households where we've found misconnected properties, around about 1,000 appliances taken out of the river system that were previously polluting it. We've worked very closely with Harrow Council to develop several major new wetlands in Harrow. Harrow Council have been brilliant in leading on that. We've also worked over the last 10 years with Heathrow Airport to for them to build and activate a new glycol treatment plant. We became aware that glycol in the river in the winter, which is used for um, uh, dealing with freezing conditions at the airport, was also creating a large layering of sewage fungus in the river. Since that treatment plant has been working, we haven't had any sewage fungus in the river, and that's really shown up on our RMI scores, which has been great. So we are hopeful, and the Environment Agency is also hopeful that we can move, that we can actually move to good FWC status as far as part of all this and other work. Our recent WFD scores have been very encouraging and moving in that direction. Ethne, next slide, please. So the next issue is biodiversity. And our first task really was to bring all the data together and undertake a number of surveys across both the plants and animal species. We do recognize very early that rivers in urban areas are critical as both blue, green, and dark corridors cutting across urban settings, and often providing the only or major green space for many people, providing a major green transport route for many people. So, and actually are increasingly recognized as having that value. So we're interested in both the aquatic habitat and also the associated terrestrial habitats, the woodland habitat, the heathland habitat, the acid grassland habitats are all linked together. One of the main things we've done over the last 5 years is mink control and developing habitat for a water vole reintroduction. So we're very pleased to release 173 water voles into the catchment this summer. And we're tracking those using volunteers, fortnightly surveys to see how they are moving through the catchment. We're also, for the first time, been having a coordinated approach across the 5 boroughs into INS, invasive non-native species. We started off looking at giant hogweed, which is a major impactor on the way that the public can use the open space. We're also looking at knotweed, we're looking at crassula, we're looking at floating pennywort, balsam, and various others. Again, on a catchment basis, we're able to look at fish barriers and removing barriers to fish migration, and actually also looking at environmental land management plans and taking the good practice from one borough, Richmond, and basically looking to roll that out across the other 4 boroughs across the catchment. And volunteers are absolutely critical to implementing environmental and management plans. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Ethne, next slide, please. So here's a couple of photos. The one on the left shows a river restoration pilot we delivered in that concrete lower 4 kilometers of the river. As you can see, we've removed the concrete over a short section. We put berms on either side of the river, and we put gravel in the bed. And each of those interventions has been shown through monitoring to have made a major difference. Kicking that gravel, we had an RMI score which is as good as anywhere else in the river, which is amazing, given that it's a concrete bed. We've also seen evidence of hundreds of fish spawning using actually the rock roll in the berm as a place of refuge and for spawning. So it's been a really successful project. On the right-hand side, there's a new fish path. You can see it running up through the green space up from the river. That would not, I don't think that would have happened. It cost well over £1 million without the way that the program has kind of brought all the partners together to deliver that. Next slide, please, Ethne. So community, as I said, is absolutely critical. And we've been amazed by how many community groups are actually out there, how many friends of groups are out there, many of whom were working in little silos, weren't aware that even that how the river worked and how the river um, linked them all together, and now it is linking them all together. Again, typically, a lot of these groups initially were middle class white groups. We're now linking across socioeconomic barriers. We're linking with a lot of ethnically diverse groups who absolutely no reason why all sorts of different groups can't work in the river, but often there are cultural barriers that we're learning more about that stop them from doing it. Our target is no orphan river reaches. We're getting there. The number of orphan reaches, number of reaches without a friends group has really reduced over the last 5 years, which is terrific. We recognize that we need to grow volunteering in order to make this work. We're currently at around about 20 full-time equivalent people across the catchment delivering things every day. We need to grow that to around 40 full-time equivalent over the next 5 years. And that's not just people do-gooding, so to speak. It also links to their own training. It links to potential employment. We're increasingly involved in social prescribing, where people are getting health benefits and are being prescribed volunteering by their GP, essentially. And also citizen science. We're integrating our citizen science into our volunteering. It's a great way of learning. It's a great way of doing much more detailed monitoring of the outputs of our work. Our community fund has delivered around 50, more than 50 now, actually, small grants for local capacity building. Next slide, please, Esty. So access is critical. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll crack on. Our main aspiration is a 35-kilometer route all the way down the river. It's there in principle, but it's not there in practice. It's difficult to do. So we're working with the local authorities to deliver that. And we think that will also have a sea change in changing people's understanding. Most people at the moment don't know they live in the Crane Valley. How can we change that? So that's having this trail, I think, will be key to that. And what we're seeing is that small scale improvements change the usage by 10 to 50, sometimes 100 times more people using the space. Also changes the male to female ratio. Less well-used spaces are typically 10 times more men, sometimes all men, only men using these spaces. And in the better used spaces, it's much more a 50-50 ratio, which to us indicates that the spaces are thought to be safe, considered to be safe, and that's absolutely critical. Next slide, please, Ethne. So here's some examples, a new riverside path and a new boardwalk across in various places. Next slide, please. Geomorphology is also critical, as I said. We've got pilot restorations against each geomorphological type. We're using morph, we're using citizen science to understand how this works. We're also looking at deculverting drainage ditches, which we've done in various places. And all this work we're looking to optimize for flood relief as well as environmental and community benefit. So next slide, please. So here's a couple of examples. There's a deculverted drain which ran across an open space without anybody knowing it was there. And as you can see, it's now a kind of an asset in its own right. And on the right-hand side, this was a deep, over wide, silty channel that we've put lots of deflectors into. And within a few months, the riverbed became clear. And a few months after that, we're starting to see ranunculus now growing in that riverbed. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Bethany. Next slide. Flooding is the final theme where we are looking to see how we can impact that. One of the things that we're finding is that we really wanted and hoped that we would get lots of wetlands come out of the first 5 years. We've got one major wetland. It's really difficult to deliver wetlands in an urban setting in a short time scale. We've got several in the pipeline, but timescale is certainly an issue when it comes to wetlands. And SUDS implementation is also an issue. We've been working alongside a major parallel program looking at delivering SUDs, and it's taken 5 years to get 10 SUD schemes up and running. Again, it's just the time it takes in a complex urban setting to get these things off the ground. Next slide, please, Ethne. So what are we finding? Partnership working is key to this. I mean, as I said, this is a £3 million project, but we've identified another £20 million of money. Money's not key in a way. It's partnership working brings the money in. But it does require this central coordinated body and a long-term vision to make it happen. It requires pilots, it requires monitoring, it requires evolution through the thing. It requires communities to be engaged all the way through the process, particularly in an urban setting. If you install something in an urban setting and the community aren't involved, not only would the ecosystem trash it because it's a very flashy environment, but the people themselves will trash it because they don't know it, they don't respect it. So that's absolutely critical. We're starting to talk now about connective tissue. And by that, what I mean is there is now an ecosystem of people, different organizations that have overlapping interests. The thing about rivers in urban environments, it tends not to be anybody's core interest, or if it is, they don't have the funding to deliver. But lots of people have it there on their radar in the periphery. But if we can bring partners together and have them work together, we create this connective tissue whereby it becomes easy. It becomes easy for good things to happen, and it becomes more difficult for bad things to happen. It becomes easy to pick up the phone or to write an email to people, and they respond. They say yes to things. They say yes to writing bids. They say yes to doing projects, and they know who to talk to. So this creates trust, and it delivers long-term solutions. But that it really is a long-term game. Next slide, please, Ethne. So what's the future? We really hope that this is going to roll through to 2030. Thames want to roll it out to more than half the catchments across their region. But anybody who knows, has been watching the news, knows that Thames Water and government have got bigger fish to fry at the moment. So will it happen? At the moment, we don't know. DEFRA are saying that DEFRA are saying they like it. Ofwat are saying they like it. But DEFRA are also saying that smarter water catchments has to be an instrument for the delivery of statutory duties. And it's really quite difficult to show how this directly delivers statutory duties. I mean, in a way, it's easy to show how concrete does it and business as usual does it. But business as usual isn't going to solve the problems that we've got. This is a much more innovative approach where at the start of the 5-year process, you don't know what the endpoint's going to be. But what you can expect, I think, what we've understood from these pilots is that you can expect that it will deliver transformational change. You just don't know what that transformational change is going to be, and that requires trust, and it requires people stepping into the unknown somewhat. We do believe we can get good ecological status. We think that's a realistic goal, which for an urban catchment is remarkable, I think. And we don't talk about good ecological status when we talk about with most of our stakeholders. We talk about vibrant and healthy river linked to vibrant and healthy open spaces with communities being central to that. So that's kind of the story that we're looking to generate. And hopefully Smarter Water Catchments will also be coming to you soon if we can get over this current maybe 20th century thinking in DEFRA and other parts of government. So Ethne, that's all I have to say. We'll just go to the final slide and then I'm happy to take questions. The final slide, Ethne, has just got my contact details if people want to get in contact with me personally. So it might be worth going back to there as well.
No problem. Let me just get that back up for you. And thank you so much, Rob. That was a brilliant presentation and so good to get an insight into kind of a project that's, you know, still live or coming to an end now. Hopefully everyone can see that slide there with the contact details up.
What I say actually, Ethne, is that I'm hoping it's half-time, not full-time.
Yes.
At the moment, we don't know. It's difficult playing a football match if you don't know if it's half-time or full-time.
Of course, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Rob. That was great. And as everyone's already started putting questions in, we'll move straight into the Q&A session. I just wanted to kick things off. You know, one thing that you talked about a few times in the presentation was how partnership was absolutely key to this project. I wonder if you can reflect a little bit on some of the success factors for building those partnerships between quite different stakeholders who can have quite different kind of perceived power in this. So could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. It's been something that, I mean, I started this whole journey really when we set up FORCE, Friends of the River Crane Environment, in 2003. And we didn't have any power, and we didn't really have much influence, and we had no levers to pull. And we kind of realized that we needed to work alongside people in order to make things happen. And I think the secret of success of partnerships that we found is to try and meet people where they are, to understand that they have a different agenda usually, to try and find the areas of overlap, to share success and allow people to take credit for things as much as we possibly can, and always encourage that, to share out the load, to tell people that, you know, we're not looking to pass things on to them, we're looking to sort of share things and sort of really have people do the things that are best suited to their setup and their agenda and their purpose. And it takes time. It takes time, and it takes trust, and it takes a certain amount of energy, and it takes a certain amount of knockbacks, and it requires keeping a positive outlook throughout, basically.
Thank you. And how receptive have Thames Water been to suggestions of actions that need taken? I mean, are they significant polluters themselves?
Thames Water are part of the problem, and Thames Water are part of the solution. And I think they're more a part of the solution than the problem than many people would acknowledge. I like to say, and you have to excuse the language, it's our shit. It's all our shit. You know, we're kind of, it's too easy just to blame a large organization who've made many mistakes. But I think a large organization that's full of very good people who are really trying to do their best. And that's one of the things about working with partnership, I think, is that we kind of have to identify their better angels and work with them. So yes, I mean, Thames Water are part of the problem. I mean, you know, the Thames Water are not the problem for misconnections. You know, they're trying to solve misconnections. They are the problem for cross connections, the cross connections between the sewerage infrastructure and the surface water infrastructure. And it's taken us a long time to engage with them, to actually get them to acknowledge that that is happening. But that requires, again, trust and a sort of an understanding that we're not going to beat them up for these things, which are often legacy issues or issues of not properly or fully understanding a really complicated 100-plus-year-old system often. So yes, I mean, I think we all need to take our share of responsibility for the situation that we find ourselves with UK rivers, and actually, even the situation we find ourselves in UK rivers, I don't think actually objectively is worse than it was. I think what's happened, and I think it's a really good thing, is that people have started to understand, the general public have started to understand how bad a condition some rivers are in. But actually, the fact that some rivers have improved so much means that people are actually starting to appreciate rivers as an asset. Whereas for many years, they were only seen as a drain. They were only seen as a place to get rid of your stuff. So I think that change in perception has been really positive. I think the water companies have to take a share of the load, but just hitting them over the head and making them suffer is not the answer.
Thanks, Rob. We've got a few questions about kind of biodiversity specifically as well. So have you identified any indicator species which have confirmed the health of the river?
I think the RMI is a really good method that volunteers can use, where you just do a 3-minute kick sample and then just measure up to 8 key invertebrate indicators on a log scale, basically. So I think the maximum number you can get is 24. We're typically in our better parts of the river getting scores of 11 or 12, which is a good score. And it's a score that the volunteers understand, and it's a really good shorthand for river condition. Another shorthand that we are increasingly using is ranunculus, because ranunculus tends to only thrive where you've got good levels of oxygen, you've got good flow, you've got good substrate. It's not too deep, it's not too wide. You've got light in the river, and ranunculus tends to thrive alongside other things like good invertebrates. It's a great habitat for fish, that kind of thing. So ranunculus is a good proxy, I think.
Thank you. And a couple of questions on the bigger animals as well. Whereabouts in the catchment have the water voles been released? And is there any role for beavers in your plans?
Okay, yeah, well, they've been released towards the bottom of the catchment. That's where the ecosystem is best at the moment. We're tracking them. We've got about we track them. You can't put trackers on water voles as far as I'm aware, but what you can do is put out these little rafts, little Celotex rafts, floating rafts. And a water vole is somewhat territorial. They will live in wide communities, but they're a little bit territorial, and they like to poo on the rafts to mark their territory. So we go out and look at the rafts every couple of weeks, and that allows us to track how they're moving. And what we're hoping is that as the habitat improves elsewhere along the river, that the water voles themselves will move, and it will again be an indicator. Will be an indicator for the success of our project. Beavers, yes. The issue with beavers at the moment is that due to the licensing controls, you need not just beavers, but an awful lot of fencing to keep them in. And we don't really have a site where we want to put a lot of fencing at the moment. We've got sites where we'd like to put beavers, but not where we'd like to put fencing. So in a way, we're watching with a lot of interest the other projects that are happening around London. I mean, there's the Paradise Fields in the Brent catchment is only about a kilometre or two away from the Crane, and it's a small site, and beavers look as though they've been really successful there. They've bred there this summer. So that tells us that probably beavers would be successful and could be really interesting geomorphologists, on our behalf, changing the ecosystems on our behalf, which would be great. We're just loath to spend thousands of pounds on fencing.
Thanks, Rob. And do you think mandatory biodiversity net gain requirements will assist with funding for smarter water catchments and help deliver some of the projects identified by these catchment schemes?
Well, it'd be nice to think so. I mean, the jury's out on BNG yet. I haven't seen it. It certainly hasn't been delivered in the Crane catchment yet. We are looking at BNG opportunities. The fact that BNG is linked to, I think, a 30-year management scheme, I think, is positive. There's a lot of development clamour in urban areas, and obviously they would much rather develop the green space than the grey space. And I still see green belt being renamed as grey belt as a threat, because that's in the eye of the beholder. It's certainly, I think that is a major threat. And some of our best sites are sites that were formerly developed but have been allowed to recover and therefore have got an amazing substrate. So yes, I mean, we do work very closely with a lot of developers, you know, in terms of there is such a thing, there's definitely such a thing as good development and development that already provides biodiversity net gain. Formalizing it, I think, is probably on balance a good thing, but if it's just the green light to develop green belt, that's a major red flag for us.
And we've got a comment here by an attendee who said that the issue that you raised about nature-based solutions not meeting statutory requirement thresholds is a key problem to making great schemes like this more mainstream. So any learning you can share on this and how we can try and break down this barrier would be great. And kind of adding a bit of a question onto that, you obviously mentioned monitoring and citizen science monitoring as a key part of this project. Will those kind of monitoring data sets be shared so that the evidence base can be built up for different types of interventions?
Okay. Thames are really keen to roll out smarter water catchments. They see it as the future, I think. I mean, from their perspective, it clearly shares the load, you know, shares the responsibility to some extent. But so, you know, that's a good reason in itself, from my perspective, I think, to bring more partners in who share the load. They recognize that, and I think the agency do as well, the Environment Agency do as well, that no one partner can do this on their own. So they're doing a lot of work to try and get through this Ofwat or DEFRA, probably more DEFRA barrier in terms of proofs, if you like. So they're using these pilots to do that. I'm hoping they're going to be able to publish that stuff. They're currently clearly in major battles and discussions with Ofwat and DEFRA and the agency about their whole program. But this is part of it, and I'm hoping that some of the good stuff that will come out of this is more robust arguments about nature-based solutions and their benefits. Certainly, we want to be part of that. The Citizen Crane program is delivering. We're happy to share all our data for sure. So please use that email address and drop us a line if you're interested in the data. We put an annual report out through Citizen Crane, which summarizes all the things that we've done. We're currently working on the latest version, which should be out in the next few weeks. The previous 9 annual reports are on that Crane Valley Partnership website. So if people are interested, go and have a look at those. But just drop us a line if you're interested, and we're sort of very happy to share our experience.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I'm afraid that that's all we have time for in terms of questions today. Really appreciate you taking the time to present, and thanks to everyone for putting in your questions as well. My apologies if we didn't get to your one. So that is it from us today. Thank you so much for logging in, and a particular thank you to you, Rob, for that great presentation. If you are an IES member, you can record your attendance at this webinar using the IES CPD tool in the members area of the website. This webinar has also been recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. The next FWR webinar is taking place on the 18th of October and is on ecosystem assessment using the Ramsar Convention's adopted RAWS approach, wetlands and beyond. And you can register for this on the FWR and IES websites. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Rob.